ever woken up in the middle of the night with the unshakable certainty that something was watching you? Not the vague feeling you can brush off by pulling the covers higher over your head, but a cold, electric dread crawling across your skin, telling you beyond any doubt that you are not alone. Imagine this. You open your eyes, the darkness pressing against you so thick it feels alive. You glance toward the doorway, still closed, and yet your pulse is hammering as if some unseen presence has already stepped inside. Your mouth is dry, and every instinct is screaming for you to stay perfectly still. You know, without knowing how, that if you move, you'll see something you can't ever forget. That's where this story begins. Tonight, I'm going to share accounts that are not urban legends or secondhand rumors. These are experiences from people who, like you, believed their homes were safe. People who trusted the familiar routines of their lives until the moment everything shifted, until the darkness slipped in and claimed their certainty. Some of them tried to pretend it wasn't real. They told themselves it was stress, a dream, a trick of the mind. But the human mind has a way of recognizing the truth even when we try to deny it. And once you feel that truth, once you realize something is there, you can't unfeel it. One woman heard a voice whisper her name from the far end of her hallway, though her house was locked and no one was supposed to be inside. A man woke to see a pale figure crouched beside his bed, breathing softly as if waiting for him to open his eyes. Another received a single text message that read only, "Look behind you." They all believed they would be strong, rational, unafraid. They believed they could dismiss whatever tried to reach for them from the shadows. But fear doesn't care about what you believe. It waits patiently in the places you never bother to look, certain that eventually you will. So, before we begin, I want you to do one thing. Take a moment and look around the room you're in right now. Notice the corners where the light doesn't reach, the silent doorway behind you, the space under the bed you haven't checked in years. Because once you hear these stories, you'll never look at those shadows the same way again. And if you ever wake up and feel that electric dread crawling over your skin, remember this: you're not imagining it. You're just finally seeing what was always there. Stay with me. This is only the beginning. Story 1. The House on Whitaker Lane. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to believe in haunted houses. I like to think I was rational, the sort of person who trusted what could be measured and proven. But all it took was one winter in the old colonial house on Whitaker Lane to change my mind forever. The house was one of those places you'd drive by without giving it a second glance. It sat behind a stand of leafless trees, set back from the road by a long gravel driveway. The listing described it as historic, with original woodwork and plenty of character. I'd been looking for somewhere to get away, somewhere quiet where I could finally finish my manuscript. On paper, it sounded perfect. The first time I pulled into the drive, snow was already drifting across the steps. My tires crunched over the gravel as I parked, and when I cut the engine, the silence pressed down around me. No passing cars, no voices, just the wind and the sigh of old branches brushing the side of the house. I walked up to the front door, suitcase in hand. The brass knob was cold under my fingers, and for a moment I couldn't get the key to turn. When it finally clicked open, the door swung in on silent hinges, revealing the dark hallway beyond. The air smelled of old plaster, and something sweeter, something almost metallic. I told myself it was nothing, just the smell of a place shut up too long. But when I stepped inside, I felt the first stirring of unease. It was subtle, more a sensation than a thought, that I wasn't alone. I set my bags in the foyer and explored the downstairs. The rooms were dim and cold. The kitchen counters were clean but yellowed with age. A narrow door beside the pantry led to the basement. I tried the handle and found it locked. That should have been the first sign. I chose the smaller of the two upstairs bedrooms because it felt less oppressive. The wallpaper was faded blue, peeling around the corners, and the window overlooked the yard. I left the blinds open, hoping the moonlight would make it feel less claustrophobic. That first night, I woke to the sound of footsteps. They were so soft I thought I was imagining them. Slow, deliberate steps across the living room below. I held my breath, listening as they paused at the base of the stairs. Then, silence. In the morning, I convinced myself it was the old wood settling in the cold. That's what old houses did, they groaned and shifted. But that evening, when I came in from the cold, the air felt heavier, like the house was holding something in reserve. I tried to ignore it. I made dinner, set up my laptop at the kitchen table, and worked until my eyes burned. Just before midnight, I climbed the stairs, too tired to care that the hallway light flickered behind me. At 2 a.m, I woke again. This time it wasn't footsteps. It was a whisper. "Are you there?" I sat up in bed, heart pounding. The voice had come from the hallway, low and hoarse, close enough that I thought I might see someone if I opened the door. I didn't move. I lay back down and pulled the blanket to my chin, telling myself I was dreaming. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep again. The next day, I called the property manager. When I asked if anyone had ever reported strange occurrences, he was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. "Some tenants said they heard things," he said finally. "Voices, knocking. One woman claimed she saw a figure on the stairs. But houses that old, sometimes they hold memories." I wanted to hang up. I didn't want to know any more, but before I could say goodbye, he added, "If it gets worse, call me." That night, I checked every lock twice. I closed the blinds and left the hallway light on. I even wedged a chair under the knob of the basement door. But when I woke at 3 a.m., the chair had been moved aside. The basement door stood open just a crack, as if someone were waiting in the darkness below. I should have left then. But I told myself there had to be an explanation. For the next week, the sounds continued. Sometimes it was footsteps. Other times, it was that low voice, whispering words I couldn't make out. Once, I found a handprint on the frosted window pane in the kitchen, a small, perfect outline pressed into the glass. I started to dread the evenings. As soon as the sun set, the house seemed to tighten around me. The shadows grew longer, the corners darker. It felt as if someone was always watching, just out of sight. One night, as I was drifting to sleep, I heard a soft scraping from the hallway. A pause. Then the whisper again, right outside my door. "Let me in." My skin went cold. I lay frozen, listening as the handle turned just slightly enough to make the latch click. When I finally opened the door, there was nothing there, but the carpet was flattened, as if someone had been standing there waiting. I packed a bag that night, but when I reached the front door, I found it locked. Not just latched, the deadbolt turned from the inside, though I hadn't touched it. No matter how I twisted the knob, it wouldn't budge. I slept in the living room chair, facing the door, clutching my keys like a talisman. At dawn, the lock turned easily, as if it had never been stuck at all. I drove away without looking back, heart hammering. A week later, the property manager called to ask if I'd left anything behind. When I told him no, he paused, voice tight. "We found something in the basement," he said. I didn't ask what it was. I didn't want to know. I never finished the manuscript I went there to write. But sometimes, late at night, when the house I live in now is still, I hear that same whisper in the darkness. And I remember. Some doors, once opened, never truly close. Story 2. The Man in the Orchard. I grew up in a place most people would call quiet. A small town in Northern California where the days moved slow and the nights were darker than you'd expect. Even after all these years, when I close my eyes, I can picture the old orchard behind my parents' house rows of gnarled plum trees, stretching out in every direction, their branches tangling together like a net. As kids, we'd sneak out after dark and dare each other to run between the trees. The older kids told stories about a man who lived there, someone who watched from the shadows. waiting for the right moment to step out and follow you home. I never believed any of it. I thought it was just the kind of tale you told to scare your friends. But some stories have a way of growing teeth. The year I turned 22, I came back to help my father after his heart surgery. My mother had been gone for almost a decade by then, and the house felt emptier than I remembered. Every floorboard creaked. Every door seemed to sigh when you closed it. But it was the orchard that unsettled me most. The first night home, I stood at my old bedroom window staring out into the rows of trees. The moon was bright enough to paint everything in silver. I told myself the feeling was just nostalgia memories of childhood games and the thrill of being a little bit scared. Then I saw something move between the trees. Just a flicker of motion, pale and quick like someone slipping behind the nearest trunk. My chest tightened, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to admit that I'd felt a chill work its way down my spine. That night, I woke to knocking. 3 slow, measured knocks against the back door. I held my breath, listening. For a long time, nothing happened. Then came the knocking again, 3 knocks, always the same rhythm. I waited for my father to get up, but the house stayed silent. Finally, I slipped out of bed and padded down the hall. I flipped on the porch light and looked through the glass. The yard was empty, the orchard still. The next morning, I asked my father if he'd heard anything. He just shook his head. "Probably a branch," he said, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. The second night, the knocking came earlier, just past midnight. This time, I didn't wait. I went straight to the door and opened it. Bare footprints trailed across the frost, leading from the orchard to the steps. They were small and perfectly formed, as if someone had walked barefoot through the freezing grass. I closed the door and locked it. My hands were shaking. I tried to sleep, but when I drifted off, I dreamed of the orchard. I was standing in the rows of trees and a man waited at the far end. I couldn't see his face. His body was thin, draped in something like a white coat. He raised one hand and beckoned me closer. The knocking became a ritual. Every night, always 3 times. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps crossing the porch, slow and heavy. Other times I'd hear a voice. "Let me in," it would whisper. I started to dread nightfall. I kept every light on, but the feeling never left me, that someone was waiting just beyond the glass, watching. One evening, I asked my father again, "Did Mom ever hear anything?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked past me toward the orchard. "She used to say there was a man out there," he said finally. "Said she saw him watching the house. I told her it was just her imagination." "Was it?" I asked. His mouth tightened. "I don't know." That night, I sat in the living room with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands. Just before 3 a.m., the knocking came again. 3 slow raps against the door. I stood up, my breath shallow. "Let me in," the voice whispered. It was so soft I thought I might be imagining it. But the words sank into me like ice. I didn't sleep at all. When dawn came, I stepped outside to find the footprints again, leading into the orchard. I followed them, though every step made my chest tighten. The prints ended beneath the oldest tree, a plum so large its branches touched the ground. Pinned to the trunk was a scrap of cloth nailed in place. On it, written in faded ink, were the words, "I am still waiting." I stumbled back and nearly fell. My heart was racing so hard I thought I'd pass out. I spent the next week sleeping in town. When I returned, my father was gone. He'd passed quietly in the night. I buried him beside my mother in the cemetery across from the orchard, and I sold the house as quickly as I could. Years later, I drove through that town again. I told myself I wouldn't stop. But when I reached the old property, I pulled over and stepped out. The orchard was the same rows of trees, dark and silent. For a moment, I thought I saw someone standing between the trunks, a pale shape watching me from the shadows. I didn't wait to see if it moved. Sometimes, when I wake up before dawn, I swear I hear knocking in my dreams. 3 slow raps, and then the softest voice. Let me in. If you ever hear that voice, no matter how tired or curious you are, do yourself a favor. Don't open the door. Because some things, once invited inside, will never leave. Even now, years later, I can't say I fully understand what happened in that house on Whitaker Lane or in the orchard behind my family's home. All I know is that no amount of logic could explain the things I saw or the voices I heard. People like to believe that the world makes sense, that there are rules we can rely on, that if you lock your doors and leave the lights on, nothing can touch you. But maybe that's the most dangerous lie of all. Because if you spend enough nights alone, if you listen carefully when the hour grows late, you might realize that the quiet isn't empty, that sometimes it's simply waiting for you to notice it. And once you do, you'll never be able to unhear that soft voice whispering just beyond the door, asking the same question over and over. Are you there? Will you let me in? It doesn't matter if you try to forget. The memories have a way of finding you again, in the moments when you least expect them. Driving past an old house, seeing frost on the steps at dawn, or waking to that familiar rhythm of knocks in the darkness, 3 slow raps, each one a little louder than the last. Most people will tell you it's just the wind, just the settling of old wood, just a dream, and maybe you'll believe that for a while. Maybe you'll feel safe again. But if you ever find yourself standing at your own door, hand hovering over the knob, and you hear that voice, calm, patient, impossibly close, ask yourself one question before you turn it. Are you sure you want to know who's on the other side? Because the people in these stories thought they did. And by the time they learned the truth, it was already too late to turn back. So tonight, when the lights go out and your house falls silent, remember, some doors are better left closed, and some invitations can never be taken back. Sleep well, if you can. Even now, years later, I can't say I fully understand what happened in that house on Whitaker Lane, or in the orchard behind my family's home. All I know is that no amount of logic could explain the things I saw or the voices I heard. People like to believe that the world makes sense, that there are rules we can rely on, that if you lock your doors and leave the lights on, nothing can touch you. But maybe that's the most dangerous lie of all. Because if you spend enough nights alone, if you listen carefully when the hour grows late, you might realize that the quiet isn't empty. That sometimes it's simply waiting for you to notice it. And once you do, you'll never be able to unhear that soft voice whispering just beyond the door, asking the same question over and over. Are you there? Will you let me in? It doesn't matter if you try to forget. The memories have a way of finding you again, in the moments when you least expect them. Driving past an old house, seeing frost on the steps at dawn, or waking to that familiar rhythm of knocks in the darkness. 3 slow raps, each one a little louder than the last. Most people will tell you it's just the wind, just the settling of old wood, just a dream. And maybe you'll believe that for a while. Maybe you'll feel safe again. But if you ever find yourself standing at your own door, hand hovering over the knob, and you hear that voice, calm, patient, impossibly close, ask yourself one question before you turn it. Are you sure you want to know who's on the other side? Because the people in these stories thought they did. And by the time they learned the truth, it was already too late to turn back. So tonight, when the lights go out and your house falls silent, remember, some doors are better left closed, and some invitations can never be taken back. Sleep well, if you can.